Hey everyone, so a lot of you guys were asking me to make some weapon recommendations, loadout recommendations, build recommendations for Rite of the Nine, which is coming out next week. And so originally I was kind of like, the meta hasn't changed that much, maybe I won't make this video, but a lot of you guys were asking, and so I went over every single boss, and obviously you guys know these dungeons released on contest accidentally, like a couple weeks ago now, and a bunch of people were able to clear them. I myself went through like a full contest prophecy, which was pretty fun. But so yeah, we're going to talk about some of the changes that were made. So if you guys are anti-spoiler, just like know that some of the mechanic changes that are being made for this activity, I will talk about some of them. So, this is your warning. Click away if you don't want to hear about them. But for the most part, yeah, as far as we know, Ghost of the Deep and Spire of the Watcher have almost like no changes unless they just didn't make the changes yet. So kind of the jury is out on that one. We don't know yet. But Prophecy, 3 out of the quote unquote 4 encounters are changed. So we'll talk about that in a moment, okay? So briefly, let's talk about the damage meta and what is going to be special about this activity compared to just clearing dungeons normally, right? So obviously, you're going to be on contest. So the big question a lot of people are asking when it comes to damage is Lord of Wolves, right? Lord of Wolves, okay, sorry about that. Lord of Wolves just got nerfed by 30%, or it will be nerfed with this Rite of the Nine patch. And so a lot of people are asking, oh, is it still going to be good? Is it like nerfed? Can I use it still for this? And the answer is yes, right? Because Lord of Wolves it still has the same DPS as Akelous, which is like a heavy shotgun, but it's a little safer, right? Like obviously the crit requirement is a little bit higher and it's a little bit more punishing to use, but it is a little bit of a longer ranged weapon. So on a boss like Ecthar, for example, where you'd have to be face tanking and shooting him like in the stomach pretty much to be using Akelous effectively, Lord of Wolves, you can sit back a little bit and not be as, in as much danger. There's a couple other bosses I think here where I think I recommend Lord of Wolves just for whether, you're shredding majors or something in like a roam encounter, like a mechanics encounter, or for like boss damage itself. So Lord of Wolves is definitely still usable. It's not as OP as it was, but to be honest with you, I think most people are going to be playing for a 2-phase in these dungeons, and I don't think Lord of Wolves being nerfed is going to affect its ability to 2-phase bosses whatsoever. Even players who were playing suboptimally, just going through having fun for their first clears, like, for example, Salt's team, I think they cleared all 3 dungeons. They were able to easily 2-phase bosses with Lord of Wolves when the shotgun was appropriate. So I think even after the nerf, as long as you are, you have surges, you have well, that sort of thing, you should be more than fine, okay? And then, so main damage outside of Lord of Wolves, let's briefly talk about what the meta is going to be going into this activity. So long range, I'm thinking 1 Divinity and 1 Queenbreaker and 1 Divinity and 2 Queenbreaker or 2 Microcosm. Some bosses, maybe 3 Microcosm will be more appropriate. But again, if we're playing for consistency here, I think these weapons will more than likely be able to 2-phase any kind of dungeon boss that is in these 3 dungeons. So I think, just go for the consistent option, safe play. The div is just there for consistency's sake and to make sure you're not like missing your shots, right? And then short range, Lord of Wolves, not a lot of these dungeon bosses are like super short range. So Lord of Wolves is not going to, crop up as much as you might think. It's actually more for encounters where you're doing mechanics and you just want to be able to like shred a mini boss really quickly. But outside of that, it's used for some bosses here. Okay. And then finally, one more thing I want to point out is that compared to raids, there's actually a fair number of dungeon bosses where you're like moving around during damage. Like Kell Echo comes to mind, right? Where you're hopping from island to island, otherwise you die of dark entropy. So having one person on Lumina and like Scintillation or something, or Mistral Lift, that's actually not a terrible idea. Their damage is not going to be terrible, obviously, compared to Queenbreaker. And instead of just having a well and then just leaving the well and having no damage buff for like the first island on Kell Echo, you can just have, that guy on Lumina and just boom, Lumina 1 person, keep going from island to island. And then obviously you can use like Hobgoblins or whatever to like refresh your Lumina Noble rounds. So yeah, that's my opinions on main damage. Now, the third thing I want to talk about is Notswap consequences. So obviously there's the Notswap modifier on this dungeon. It's been talked about a lot. But basically, the main consequence this is going to be having for like most people who play through this is just you're not allowed to swap exotic armor outside of exotic class items. So the biggest effects here are going to be Hunter and Warlock. So Hunter, you're going to be disincentivized to play Nighthawk because Nighthawk's neutral is not very good, right? Obviously, it's good for generating super on, crit kills, but survivability-wise, it doesn't have anything on like a gifted or like a Hoyle cert build. So not great, right? I will point out here that Silence and Squall and Nighthawk, their total damage is actually not that different. Obviously, Nighthawk has much higher DPS because, it's all of your shots in one golden gun shot, all of your damage that is. But I think Silence and Squall is a little underrated for like a day one, right? So if you have no one else on Squall, no one else freezing the boss and stuff like that to take away your damage, Silence and Squall is not bad, right? It's not bad. So you could certainly run that instead of running Nighthawk, and then you're free to run, you know, Gifted Conviction. You're free to run whatever exotic you want, and it's not going to like negatively affect your damage too much, right? Now, some bosses where the combat pressure is not that high, Nighthawk will still make sense. I'm thinking like Akelous, for example. It's not that hard to not die on Akelous, and the Nighthawk is obviously very good for that kind of boss, very easy to hit. So, you know, it's your judgment call, but again, this is like a big effect, I guess, of Notswap. The other one is like Warlocks, right? Warlocks, you can't be on Sanguine for main damage, and also, you know, swap to something else like a Hoyle Syntho class item or Getaway Artist or whatever you want to swap to for mechanics. So either you make a Sanguine build, which Sanguine is honestly a better neutral exotic than Nighthawk, so it's probably not a terrible idea, or you just stay on your add clear stuff, or, you know, on something else for the entire encounter. That being said, Warlock I think is not as big of an impact, like not having Nighthawk for your damage super. For like a Nova, for example, it's not that bad, and obviously just being on Well is kind of just always going to be good. So it doesn't diminish the goodness of the super as much. And then finally, Titans. I did mention exotic class items. You can swap from exotic class item to exotic class item. So you can run like Hoyle Syntho on Consecration or Scar or whatever you want. And then you can also run Starred or Eternal for damage and swap. It's kind of up to you. I will also shout out Synthos, just like base Synthos, because those can kind of do double duty. They give you increased super damage when you're surrounded, and then they also give you the increased melee damage as well. But you're obviously foregoing the Hoyle. So it's kind of up to you. A couple options there. But that's like the main sandbox kind of circumstances that we're in right now when it comes to just generally speaking what we're going to first approach when it comes to making strategies for these dungeons. So I'm going to go over some specific class stuff, and then we're going to go over each encounter. So first we have Warlock, right? Warlock, you're just going to be on Well for the most part. There's some phases where you're going to be moving from like island to island or something like that, and you're trying to avoid dying to chip damage, like Kell Echo, again, good example. Song of Flame could be good for that. You could also use a damage super like, you know, Starred or Nova or something like that. But I definitely wouldn't take Well on some damage phases where like you're moving from place to place. So it's gonna be Well usually, don't get me wrong, but you know, if you're moving from place to place, you know, just be aware that Well might not be a good idea. Okay. And then for roam content, so I'm talking like mechanics encounters, whether we're talking like Ghosts entrance, or if we're talking Prophecy Wasteland, Prophecy Cube. Lightning Surge Devour, I think, is generally the go-to when it comes to contest. I do think it is more consistent and more like snap healing, more like clutch factor, I guess. Not really clutch factor, but like if you're about to die, I would rather be on Lightning Surge Devour than something like Getaway Artist. But if you're more comfortable with Getaway Artist, there's some encounters where I'm going to recommend Getaway Artist instead of Lightning Surge Devour instead. So, you know, you can use both. And then obviously for Well, you can be on like Speakers or Mantle or like Sanguine. There's like a bunch of exotics. It's kind of your preference. Sunbracers too. Hunter, you know, you're usually going to be on Nighthawk if you're on Goldie, but again, like I mentioned, Squall is a decent option with similar total damage. Dungeons, unlike raids, I would say, have a lot of situations where Tether is actually a good debuff, because there's constantly spawning enemies that are able to refresh the Tether and keep it active for the entire phase, right? And obviously, having Tractor in a dungeon team versus having Tractor on a raid team is much more of a problem, because you're losing a third of your damage rather than a sixth. So Tether is actually pretty good on some bosses like Ecthar, for example. A ton of enemies around to refresh. So that's definitely something to be thinking about. Roam content wise, we already talked about the two builds that are good, like Hoyle Cert, Gifted. Everyone kind of already knows this. And then finally Titan, right? So Titan, DPS, and DPS encounters, you're always going to be running T-Crash. I don't think there's any reason to run any other exotic, really. So, I mean, you could run maybe like, I don't know, Twilight Arsenal if you want, if you're using like Lord of Wolves for damage, if you want a consistent debuff. That's an option if you want, but mostly you're going to be running T-Crash. And then be aware that obviously Starred or Eternal is good for Queenbreaker, because Arc matches Arc, right? And then, yeah, I mean, Synthos is an option as well. One thing I want to shout out before we kind of get into this table here is that I think for roam gameplay, the Scar class item is actually very good in contest content specifically, like content where you're forced to sit back and you can't just be in an enemy's face all the time, or like you're not 100% familiar with the ad spawns, so you can't be spawn camping everything. So Consecration and Knockout is obviously very good for healing, but I think the Scar class item is pretty underrated when it comes to, like, let's say you're doing an encounter where you need to be focused on shooting objectives for mechanics, and you only have time to kill like 1 or 2 ads between every mechanic that you're working on. Then I think Scar is like really good for that, because for example, if you're on Choir and you're on like Twilight Arsenal on Prismatic and you have a Scar class item, you can like shoot some nodes in like, you know, Spire the Watcher or something like that, go shoot a Harpy, and then you get some resto in between. So I do think the Scar class item is pretty underrated and pretty good for those sorts of encounters rather than running like Hoyle Syntho. Yeah, and then again, like I said, match your super to your main clear weapon if you're going to use the Scar class item. All right, so that is it for the summary of the meta going in. Now let's talk about specific encounters, because there's going to be some specific stuff that deviates from the basics that I just talked about that might be of interest to you. Okay, so let's start with Ghost of the Deep. Now when it comes to new stuff, like changes in the dungeon, unless they plan on changing things beyond what we already saw when these dungeons released by accident, on entrance, we're going to assume that the timer is not going to be that tight, because for those of you that don't know, on contest when it was released by accident, the timer for entrance, I believe you got 1 round's worth of time to finish like all of the rounds. So you never got a timer refresh on that kind of that ticking like a range timer. So yeah, they're probably going to change that because it's very, very tight. And I don't think the average player is going to be able to complete on contest with that modifier active if they don't refresh the timer. So that's probably going to be changed. But besides that, no changes. Okay. Now, one shout out here that's probably like the most specialized exotic weapon out of any encounter here is going to be Ariana's Vow. Okay. Ariana's Vow, if you haven't used it recently, they changed it. If you pop a shield with it, it ignites the target and, breaks the shield in one shot pretty much. And so really, really good for Ghost entrance, because all the shields of the important adds that need to die quickly so that you are not having time pressure, they're all solar, right? So Ariana's Vow is excellent. It kind of just, 2 taps, 1 wizard, 2 wizard, everything just blows up, right? And so you end up being able to run something like a sword. You can run a machine gun if you want, but Ariana's Vow kind of just handles everything for you. And then once you get to those final sections where you have the Lucent Hive and all these ads spawn, I would just use a splash super. So Warlock, you could be on Nova. Hunter, you could be on Squall, you can be on Tether, whatever. Titan, you can be on T-Crash, whatever it is. And then obviously I didn't write anything down here, but just run like survivability mechanic stuff. So like roam stuff here. Pretty straightforward. I don't think people are going to have too much trouble with this. But yeah, Ariana's Vow is a shout out here. I also put like a trace with a question mark because like the moths are probably going to hurt on contest. So Ariana's Vow, probably not very good at dealing with moths. So probably just run a trace to like shoot the moths because you don't really need anything else for ad clear besides Ariana's Vow. Okay, so that's number 1. Let's go to Ecthar next. Transitions, I'm pretty sure they didn't change anything, so we're not going to talk too much about that. Obviously, the ads and the transitions, like the Shriekers, hurt a lot more, but, I think you guys already know that. Let's go to Ecthar. So Ecthar, I think when Salt was clearing this encounter, they said, like, you drown faster. Like, I did notice, like, once the meter had fully run out, like, the pressure resistance meter, like, ran out, they died almost instantly. I don't know if this is intended or not. If it is intended, then, just be aware of that. I guess you have, like, less time down there before you need to, go into a bubble. But I don't think that's like a major change that's going to affect what weapons you use. You can't really like play around that besides just getting a bubble faster. So, that is what it is. In terms of damage, though, I will say you kind of have 2 options. Microcosm is pretty good for this dungeon because it melts shields really quickly. So you don't need to have like an Arbalist user or something like that. You could just have like 3 microcosms and have like one guy on like Twilight Arsenal or Tether or whatever for a debuff. Or you can use Lord of Wolves. I think those are like the 2 different options you can go for here. Microcosm is maybe going to be a little bit more consistent, but Lord of Wolves will give you like sword ammo if you want to do transition. The second encounter to third encounter transition, at least in Salt's Clear, looked pretty treacherous. So you may want to have someone on a sword and something like Silence, like a Shadow Dive Hunter to like Shatter Skate or something, because it is pretty rough, and you're probably going to end up white pulling to Simmumah. Because it is, there's a lot of Shriekers, a lot of ads there that are pretty rough. Okay, so these are your 2 options. Lord of Wolves, obviously keep your distance, because I do think he will probably one-shot you with a slam attack on contest. But if I'm wrong, you could try something like Winter Bite. But I think these are the 2 safest options as of right now, right? Warlock, obviously you want to be on Well, kind of a no-brainer. Hunter, again, Tether is good here because there's a ton of ads around Ecthar to extend. And then Titan is like, you're just going to be on, you might notice here, but you're on T-Crash for like every encounter because, T-Crash is good. Okay. Simmumah, the final boss of Ghost of the Deep. I don't think anything changed, at least from when I was watching Salt's Clear, kind of skimming through it. I don't think anything changed. Basic strategy, Div Microcosm or Div Queenbreaker. Like either one is going to work. Maybe Div Queenbreaker might be a bit better, so you don't have to, worry about debuff as much. You can have like a free 27% debuff or whatever instead of 15. Warlock, well, really good, right? You can place it wherever you do your last dunk for Simmumah and then just not have to worry about any chip damage. Hunter, you can be, again, Nighthawk, Squall, Tether. Tether is like kind of famously good on this boss for keeping her kind of staggered or whatever if you break her shield or whatever. Actually, no, that might be misinformation. I think it's just breaking her shield quickly. Okay, so I'm going to revise that. Make sure you break her shield quickly, okay? I'm pretty sure if you break Simmumah's shield very quickly after you dunk, she does not TP as much. So just keep that in mind. Obviously, Microcosm will shred her shield very quickly. And then finally, Titan, you're on T-Crash. Not a surprise. Consecration, again, not a surprise. Very good for dealing with the mini bosses and the ads inside of all the kind of underwater rooms. So yeah, that's it for Ghosts. Let's keep going for Prof. Prophecy, we actually did see a bunch of changes in a bunch of the encounters. So again, if you don't like spoilers, I'm going to kind of briefly discuss them here. First things first, I didn't write this down on the table, but learn how to do the skip up the pipe to get to Phalanx Echo. It's not very hard these days. You kind of just, when you first get teleported through that portal, like when you enter the dungeon, just jump up on the golden ball and then look top left. There's a kind of dark tube that leads upward, and just jump in there and just spam sword. Just spam sword, spam sword, spam sword. Eventually, you'll be able to jump on top of this circular disc, like this, I don't know, semicircle looking thing, semi-sphere looking thing, half a sphere. You're going to jump on that, and then you're going to eager edge sword to Phalanx, and then you don't need to do the entrance encounter. So you can just go straight to Phalanx just to get that out of the way. Okay, that was not patched in the Rite of the Nine mode or like the contest mode that we played. So just do that. Okay, so we're not going to talk about entrance. Let's move on to Phalanx. Phalanx, the only change here, or there's two changes technically. The first change is that Bungie changed Taken Phalanxes semi-recently within the last like season or two, and made their shields bigger and made the Phalanx's default standing position so that the shield is generally facing toward you, which is very annoying for projectile or just like kind of regular gun shooty weapons. Okay, so because of that, this boss I'm going to recommend some different stuff from what I would normally recommend, because Microcosm can't shoot through shields. Well, that kind of shield, even if you know you're have Radiant, right? You need to be in your own well pretty much if you want to pierce that sort of shield. You need super damage, right? So a lot of the weapons that I would recommend normally, like Lord of Wolves, because he's pretty close range, or like, I don't know, any of these weapons really that you see listed here, are not really going to work very well. So in my opinion, you kind of have two options, right? You can either go for something like Parasite and Burst Supers and just like pray that that does like 3/4 of his health, and then just chip him down with like, I don't know, pellet shotguns or something like that, which is like the speedrunner strat. Or you could just do rockets. I think rockets are generally pretty safe. You could try some other exotic weapons like 1K or something like that, but I generally do think that probably just using splash weapons are better, right? So bring some damage supers, bring like one well to survive the chip damage from like the goblins and scions around you and stuff like that. And yeah, maybe you could try like heavy waveframes or something. But yeah, the main thing here is that his shield is just annoying. It's just really annoying now. And you need to be a well placer in your own well if you want to pierce that shield with weapon damage. Just plain Radiant does not work. Okay. Second change that is an actual mechanics change is that you have to actually dunk on Tolan first. So there's 4 of these, dunk spots in the air that you need to cleanse. And one of them is going to have Toland. Just dunk on Toland first. The other 3 you can do in whatever order you want. I don't know if this will be changed further so that you have to keep dunking on Toland over and over. But at least when we did it, it was just dunk on Toland first and then the other 3 or whatever. Okay. Tether is good here. Felwinter, this is one of the bosses you can do a Felwinter on because it's pretty chill in terms of combat pressure if everyone's kind of shooting ads. And there's constantly spawning ads, so you're not going to run out of ads to Felwinter. You can debuff extend if you want, like I mentioned in my recent video. Or you can just, again, Tractor, Tether, I don't know. This boss doesn't have a lot of health. Even on contest, it was like, I'm pretty sure you get solo 1 phase this boss on contest. Really long phase. Yeah, pretty chill. So it doesn't really matter that much what you use. Just, I don't know. This encounter is pretty easy. And then, yeah, Storm's Keep, optional. Again, honestly, Storm's Keep is nice and all, and Flashover is cool and all, but yeah, again, it's optional. You can play Prismatic, you can play Storm's Keep. It's kind of, up to you. I think it's a 2-phase either way on all of these bosses, besides like maybe like Phalanx. Okay, next up we have Wasteland. So Wasteland, the mechanics are the same, right? You go to 3 different sections in the Wasteland, you kill the Blights. Blight-wise, if you're not aware, just use Choir or Bastion. Probably Choir. Choir's more ammo efficient. You can use a sword because there's not that much stuff to worry about in terms of like chunky targets to take out with your heavy weapon. And again, you could just use Choir. You can also use a machine gun if that's more your speed, kind of up to you. You don't really need a sword for movement because you can Sparrow in this environment. The big change here in Wasteland is that at the end, once you're done, before Toland lets you go to the cube encounter, there's like a big mini boss fight at the end. So there's like these 4 big minotaurs that are just kind of chilling there. I think they're called like paracausal invaders or something. And they're all clumped up. So it's really nice for a tether. You can just tether in between them and then you can kind of chain all the damage together, which is nice. If you have more than 1 Warlock, you can have one of them on like Chaos or Nova or something. That's up to you. But other than that, I'd probably have a well because they're, the chip damage of being just in that open plane doing damage is, kind of annoying. And then Titan, yeah, just be on T-Crash. T-Crash in the middle of them, boom, explode, yeah. Okay. That's it for Wasteland. I mean, obviously you can be on Scar as well. I'm not even going to mention this. I mean, I think you guys get the idea. Okay. Next up we have Cube, or Hexahedron, right? This is kind of the same thing. I mean, the encounter is practically the same. You have this big, like, Ascendant Realm looking knight guy that's like chasing you the entire time, but he is pretty harmless. You just kind of ignore him, to be honest. Just don't go near him, I guess, because he might one-shot you. And then at the end, you get to kill him, right? So you have your normal mini-bosses, and you also get to kill him. So, yeah, this one, Lord of Wolves, great for this encounter because it shreds through these orange bar knights very quickly. It's hit scan unlike Choir, right? So Choir is, as much as I love Choir, Choir is my baby, but as much as I love Choir, it is definitely worse than Lord of Wolves for an encounter like this because the ADS mode, awkward to kill knights with close range, and then the hip fire kind of mode is annoying to kill teleporting knights with. Lord of Wolves is just a lot better for that kind of thing. And then so yeah, you can run Lord of Wolves, you can run like a rocket sidearm if you want in your kinetic slot, or you can run a support auto. Really up to you, it doesn't really matter. Sword is probably good here, that's fine. More than likely by the end of the encounter, you're going to have enough Lord of Wolves ammo to deal with the mini bosses. So yeah, I mean, or the mini boss. So yeah, you don't really need to worry about being on like a heavy weapon for DPS, not really a big deal. And then in terms of roam gameplay, I'm not even going to mention the builds here. It's just the same stuff as what we had before. I mean, you're free to use like maybe Solar Titan instead of, you know, Prismatic Titan here because of, you know, Healing Nade and just access to, you know, Empyrean and stuff like that. It's really up to you, right? Sunspots are pretty good in this encounter. But again, I'm sure you'll have success with Prismatic and Scar as well. Okay, Kell Echo. As far as I know, nothing was changed in this encounter, at least when I was playing it. There was a bug where like you couldn't actually open the door. Maybe there was something on Rainbow Road that you had to finish for the door to open, but as far as I know, it's bugged. You know, you can't actually open the door. I'm assuming that's going to be fixed, and I'm also assuming something will be changed in Kell Echo, but right now, nothing was changed, okay? Kell Echo, you can go triple Queenbreaker. That's an option, right? Or you can do 2 Queenbreaker and 1 Lumina linear, like I was mentioning. Kell Echo is like the perfect encounter to like go from island to island and have Lumina up the entire time. But again, I think even without Lumina, as long as you get a buff sometimes, you will probably 2-phase. So again, not crazy. We haven't really talked about heavy ammo generation that much so far. And the main reason for that is because Lord of Wolves has a crazy amount of reserves and does not really need reserve mods to, you know, function properly. And so Lord of Wolves obviously doesn't need heavy ammo, that too. But second, you know, Queenbreaker and Micro, they're pretty ammo efficient. And with mods like Gold from Lead, I honestly don't even think you really need a Senna or an Aeon. Like you can have one, but again, you have Notswap active, so that's going to punish you for using that. And it's not really that necessary for these activities. I think you even just base Queenbreaker, you know, with maybe like 1 reserve mod or something, or even like no reserves, probably has enough if you're buffing it enough between your teammates to 2-phase with maybe like 1 ammo pickup. So realistically, ammo not a huge issue, and I don't think people are really going to be making finishers and stuff like that because of Notswap. Okay, build wise on Kell, yeah, you can run Song. I just wouldn't run Well, right? So Devour Access is good for, you know, keeping your health up from the Hobgoblins. But yeah, Song, Chaos, Nova, whatever, Nighthawk, Thundercrash, Last Plate, yeah. Pretty straightforward stuff, nothing too complicated. Finally, let's talk about Spire, okay? Spire, I believe at the end of entrance, there is a Hydra that spawns that you need to kill before the hatch opens for you to drop into the rest of the dungeon. I'm pretty sure that's not in normal, so I think that's a change. But as far as I saw for the other encounters, there's no change besides timers being added for mechanics encounters like Ascent. So yeah, pretty straightforward. Entrance, I have a kind of a weird recommendation here, so I'm gonna recommend Kinetic Tremors, Praedyths, Choir, and a Trace, or Choir or a Trace and a Sword is what I should say. The Trace is like if you prefer a Trace for mechanics, but obviously Choir is gonna be better at killing ads. The Praedyths is for the Cyclops outside. Yeah, I'm pretty sure Praedyths with, you know, Kinetic Tremors and like some sort of damage perk will probably 2-tap the Cyclopses with the, you know, with the shockwaves included. So, I mean, yeah, just have something that can deal with the Cyclops because for the most part, you're not going to be getting one shot in entrance on Spire unless you get shot by a Cyclops. So if you have maybe 2 people on mechanics and 1 people just doing ad clear outside, just have that person on like a linear or on Praedyths or something to deal with the Cyclops because they are very annoying. Even off contest, they almost one-shot you, and on contest, they definitely will. So just be aware of that. Besides that, yeah, I mean, just regular neutral build stuff. Again, for Spire particularly, I would say Choir is good for mechanics. And so if you're on Titan, running Scar with like a Twilight Arsenal and running Choir so that you get rest all the time, I think is very beneficial. So yeah, and obviously you don't need Thunder Crash on the first 2 encounters. Okay, Ascent is up next, which is the kind of like going up, shooting more nodes, elevator encounter. There's a timer, obviously. In this encounter, there's no like Cyclops, so you don't need to run Praedyths or whatever in your kinetic slot. I would just run like Choir, Sword, Support Auto, right? There's no reason not to run a Sword on this encounter because Choir is plenty capable of dealing with the ads. And, you know, the Minotaur's Void Shielded, which is a +2. But like the ads are like not really a threat in this encounter. It's more so just kind of going around and making sure you have something to heal from chip damage with, right? So here, for example, I recommend Getaway Artist instead of Lightning Surge on Warlock because let's face it, Lightning Surge is kind of awkward to use on Ascent. I think you'll just end up Lightning Surging off the map or something. So Getaway Artist is probably better for just dealing, you know, little bits of chip damage. You're not taking that much damage during this encounter. And then Hunter and Titan are just running standard neutral builds. And then finally, we have our boss encounters. Okay, so Akelous. Oh yeah, and then transition-wise between first and second and third, I don't think anything was changed. So if you're wondering that, yeah, I don't think anything was changed. Again, but these are all subject to changes from Bungie. Like, I'm kind of surprised that they changed like 3 encounters in Prof and then like nothing else in any of the dungeons. So I'm going to assume that there will be mechanics changes in all of the encounters besides the timer ones, right? So outside of Ascent and you know, Ghost Entrance, I'm going to assume that all the boss encounters will get some sort of mechanics change, because it's a bit weird to change only some of them, right? So we'll see. Okay, anyways, Akelous. Akelous, just like some pro tips, I guess. Trace rifles are really good at breaking the eyes. For those of you that are not aware, they're really good. Some people use like a 1-for-all trace. You can trigger it off like nearby ads and just like shred through. But I'm sure if you're 3 people, like you don't really need a damage perk or any sort of optimization. I would just recommend running a trace, right? So yeah, you could run like, I don't know, Queenbreaker, trace, support auto. Sounds pretty good, right? You can use abilities or like getaway artist or something to kill the ads. Just a lot of chip damage in this encounter, nothing too crazy. And then for damage, yeah, you can do basically Kell Echo. It's basically Kell Echo, right? You're just walking forward while you're doing damage. So you could do 2 Queenbreaker, 1 Lumina, or you could do 3 Queenbreaker. Really up to you. Div is obviously not necessary on this boss. And then, yeah, damage super is pretty standard stuff. I think this might be maybe one of the only encounters where you could afford to run Nighthawk as a neutral thing, because the chip damage that you receive in this encounter is not a lot, right? So, you know, you could maybe afford to run Nighthawk. But again, I don't think running Nighthawk is going to be the difference between, you know, 2-phasing and 3-phasing. You're probably going to 2-phase. So just run whatever is consistent for you. Okay, last encounter is going to be Persys, right? That's the big wyvern. Persys, again, nothing was changed probably. I don't know. I was kind of struggling to make a recommendation for this encounter. But yeah, Salt's team, I think, ran Div Queenbreaker, and they were not like fully optimized, and they 2-phased. Like they 2-phased pretty chill with like 2 Titans on like, I think like base arc or something. So yeah, like pretty Mickey boss, pretty chill, right? I was gonna maybe suggest rockets, but again, like if Div Queenbreaker works and it's a consistent 2-phase, it's a consistent 2-phase. I mean, this encounter, obviously, there's a lot of like, you know, supplicants, and the boss itself is like very dangerous. So just play to like survive that sort of thing, and, you know, play to be more consistent on that. I think the damage is going to just kind of speak for itself. You know, you don't need to worry too much about damage. And obviously, if you're going to set up your well, don't do it right in front of the window, right? Set it up far away so that the boss has time to come to you and, you know, doesn't immediately just blast you. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, you can run Squall instead of Nighthawk if you want. You know, Thunder Crash for like the end of the phase or the start of the phase, kind of up to you, really. Eternal good for Queenbreaker. Yeah, that is pretty much it. Okay, that's pretty much it. For those of you who are paying attention to the meta here, I don't think there's any crazy surprises here. I mean, Ariana's Vow is obviously a good shout for Ghost Entrance. But yeah, nothing too crazy here. And for those of you who are just coming back to the game, you know, welcome. I hope you guys enjoy Rite of the Nine. I hope this jogs your memory when it comes to the meta for what is going to happen. If there's mechanics changes, I'm sure some other content creator will cover them when they come out. But I don't think any mechanics changes are going to fundamentally change what you bring into the encounter. So yeah, that is pretty much it. And yeah, I'll see you guys later.